All right, for section 12.1, we are going to start our trig unit. To start off, we have a little bit of vocab. So we have solving right triangles. Hopefully you remember that from geometry class. To solve a right triangle means you are finding all of the missing side lengths and all the missing angle measurements. So they're going to give you a couple of measurements for the triangle, and then you are going to find the remaining ones when you are solving it. Then we have our angle of elevation and our angle of depression. When you are working with angles of elevation and depression, they're always starting from a horizontal line. And then when you think of an elevator or elevating something, it is going up, and then depression is going down. So that's how you can tell the difference between them. Then we're going to work on our trig ratios as well. Hopefully, again, you remember the first three from geometry last year. And this is when we use the phrase so, ka, and then toa. And the O, A, and H, that stands for the opposite side, the adjacent side, and then the hypotenuse. Which I always spell wrong. Sorry about that. Okay. So then, because we have those three from last year, this year, to expand on that information, we're going to also add in the reciprocal functions. So we have our sine, cosine, and tangent. So those ones you set up, you can use SOHCAHTOA to help you remember which two sides of the triangle you're going to use. And then these three on the bottom, these ones are new, and these are the reciprocals of sine, cosine, and tangent. So remember, reciprocal just means you are switching out the top and the bottom numbers for each other. So before, we had sine was the opposite side over the hypotenuse. Now, this one, it's labeled, abbreviated CSC. That stands for cosecant. We're going to swap those, and now it's hypotenuse over opposite. So if you can find sine, you can find cosecant. Then our next one is abbreviated SEC, and we say this as secant. And that's the reciprocal of cosine. So these two go together, and these two go together. So cosine was adjacent over hypotenuse, which means secant is hypotenuse over adjacent. Then our last one is COT, which stands for cotangent. And again, tangent was opposite over adjacent, cotangent is adjacent over opposite. The way that I remember which one of these pairs up and are reciprocals of each other is that tangent and cotangent, they're the only two that have T's. Because again, these ratios might be mixed up when you're asked to find them on a quiz or a test. And then the other two, sine, cosecant, and then cosine and secant, you have one that starts with an S and one that starts with a C. So you'll notice none of the ratios that are reciprocals of each other start with the same letter. So that's one thing you can do to help you kind of pair them up. I would recommend, if you're a visual person, having 3 different colored highlighters or colored pencils so you can use that to help you remember which ones will be paired up together. Then a lot of this will be on the no calculator part of the test, but you will need to know how to type in all 6 of these on a calculator for the calculator portion. So these ratios down here, this is telling us how we type it into a calculator. So you should remember that sine, cosine, and tangent, those 3 buttons are already on the calculator, but there are no buttons for cosecant, secant, or cotangent. But we are able to type them into a calculator by just typing 1 divided by the reciprocal function. So we know cosecant and sine are reciprocals, secant and cosine, and then cotangent and tangent. So it's going to be, again, just 1 divided by the reciprocal function. So an example, if you were asked to find the cosecant of 45 degrees, I don't know why I wrote 40. we would type that into our calculator as 1 divided by sine, because it's the reciprocal of cosecant, and then 45. Then we can type it into a calculator. So if you grab a calculator, let me pull mine up. First of all, if you remember, this was part of our calculator unit where you had to check the mode. So we had 45 degrees. So you're going to hit mode, and we're going to go down to the 4th row, I think it is. And notice right now radians is blinking. I want degrees to be highlighted. So I'm going to go over to the degree word and then hit enter on that. This way, when I type it in, it's going to give me the right answer because I have an angle in degrees. If they give you an angle in radians, then you would want it to be on radians. Okay, so then you can hit clear or second mode to get out of there, and then we can type it in. So we would have 1 divided by sine, and notice it auto populates that parenthesis there for you. So you would keep that, type in your angle, and then this will give you your answer. If you want to use the fraction button, you can. If you have more than one term on the numerator or denominator, I would recommend it. This one doesn't, so typing it in the way I did at the first time or this time, both will get you to the same answers. And when you are rounding, you're usually going to go to 4 decimal points. So we'll do 1.4142 for our answer. And that's how you would type those into a calculator. Okay, so our next one, example 1, they want you to evaluate the 6 trig functions of angle theta. This would be a question that you would typically see on a no calculator part of the test. So the numbers would usually be smaller, like 2, 3, 4, 5, and numbers usually smaller than 10. For this one, because we don't know what our hypotenuse is, we need to figure it out. So that would be my C. I'm going to use Pythagorean theorem just like last time. So 8 squared plus 15 squared equals C squared. And if I add 8 squared plus 15 squared together, I would get 289 equals C squared. And then again, for this part, you would want everything to be an exact number. So if you need to simplify a radical, you should. And this would give me 17 equals C. All right, now that I know all 3 sides, I can label my opposite of theta. And again, opposite is just across from. Adjacent is the side touching it. And then the hypotenuse never moves. It's always across from that right angle. Okay. Then I go over to my 6 trig ratios, and I'm going to pair up the ones that are going to be reciprocals of each other. So I know my 3 that I remember from last year would be sine, cosine, and then tangent. And I know the 2 that have t's are reciprocal, so cotangent and tangent are together. And then for the other ones, they cannot start with the same letter. So sine will not be the reciprocal of secant, it would be cosecant. And that means cosine would have to be the reciprocal of secant. So now that I know which ones go together, you can use SOHCAHTOA if you need to. And let's start with sine. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So my opposite side is 8, and my hypotenuse is 17. Cosecant is the reciprocal, so 17 over 8. And you're going to leave them as fractions. You should simplify the fractions, but don't write them as mixed numbers. Okay, and then my next one is cosine. I'm going to do that next. Adjacent over hypotenuse, so 15 over 17. Which means secant, the reciprocal, would be 17 over 15. Then lastly, I have tangent, which I'm going to do, which is opposite over adjacent, 8 over 15. And the reciprocal would be 15 over 8. And then we have our 6 trig ratios.